Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Artful Soul, inspiration and big ideas for healing, reflection, and learning through the arts. I'm Rachel Rose. I'm part of Workshop Muse, and the Artful Soul was born out of my desire to have some conversations with people who I thought could deepen my practice and my understanding of reflecting and healing through the arts. And so I thought, if I'm going to do this, I might as well invite other people along to watch and see. So today we have Melanie Rivers, Tial Tuit is her other name, who's going to chat with us about building a joyful creative practice. So Melanie, welcome. Hi.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're happy to have you here. So I'm just Melanie has offered me a beautiful bio, so Melanie can just stand there and look shining and beautiful, and I will read this wonderful bio, and it's going to tell you so much about who she is as a person and a creative person. Melanie Rivers, Tial Tuit, is an Indigenous mixed media artist, instructor, and expressive art therapist from Squamish First Nation. She teaches in-person and online art and creativity classes to women around the world, helping them build a joyful and self-compassionate art practice. I love that. Melanie draws from her traditional ancestry and teachings in her art and in the classes that she offers. Melanie says, "Creating art brings me to the present moment, into stillness. In this space, I am not dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. In stillness, I find myself. I find peace, clarity, and connection with my real emotions." In her art, she depicts the strength, realness, and vulnerability of women. She believes art has many medicines to share with us: stillness, joy, connection, and by building a self-compassionate art practice, we can experience these medicines on a regular basis. Oh. Hi, Melanie. Welcome. You can see her beautiful people in the back too.
Yes, I've got a few of them up.
Yeah. Do you always paint women? Do you find you're always doing women?
I'm always painting women. When I started painting, I didn't know what I had an interest in, but I quickly got interested in faces.
Yeah.
And then it's always women.
It's always women. Yeah.
I painted one man because it was a commission.
Yeah. And then you were like, wait a minute, why am I doing a man? This doesn't feel right.
Like, how do I do stubble?
How do I do stubble? Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, her art is so beautiful. So I wanted to talk to Melanie. You can see why I want to talk to Melanie, because Melanie, first of all, we come from the same crew of expressive arts, which is like, yes. We're like, that's our people.
Yeah, it's a small community.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and also you talk about stillness. You talk about being present. You're talking about more than making beautiful faces and expressive faces. Mm-hmm. You're talking about really showing up in your practice, and you call that creating a joyful practice where there's self-compassion. So, Melanie, just tell us that. I love that, and that's like my dream for myself, and I think for other people. But just tell us what is a joyful practice? What do you mean when you say that?
Well, I'm a person that tends to be a little bit anxious. Mm-hmm. And my husband kept telling me for years, if you just found a creative hobby that would help relax you. And I used to be a dancer back in high school, and that was kind of my creative expression. Mm-hmm. But then I kind of got into a career and working and kind of didn't have a creative practice anymore. Mm-hmm. And so when I discovered painting, it was something immediately I was drawn to, and I just every single day started engaging with painting in some way. And so it brings me that joy because it gets me out of that worry or that forward thinking stress, and I'm just in the flow essentially. Mm-hmm. When they talk about that creative flow, it's one of the only ways that I don't experience time. I'm very much aware of time most of the time, and so when I'm sitting down to paint, time slips away, and I just feel peaceful, and I call it joyful too, because often I will be smiling because I'm just having so much fun, especially if I'm finger painting or something.
letting it all go. Hey, doing
Yeah.
something a little bit different.
Yeah. Letting that inner child come out and play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like, I mean, so this is what I'm going to think is like, so maybe some of the people watching here, they just heard what your joyful practice is like, right? Where you're like smiling in your practice and you're like playful, you're doing it daily, those sorts of things. And I'm going to guarantee you there's lots of people who are like, but she's got talent. Like, but look at her painting, right? When I show up to paint, I mostly just am wrestling myself and my critic and all the ugliness that comes with that. Like, I want to get to a place where I could sit down and be like happy with the things I'm making.
Yes.
But most of the time, I show up and I beat myself up. And I think too that's why people let it go, right? I think that like, why would you show up to something every day if you show up to that thing every day and then just use it to harm yourself and beat yourself up, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I have that inner art critic, and it's there every single time. So I've built some strategies to help myself with that inner art critic, because and I think that's why I've focused so much on the enjoyment of painting, because I wouldn't keep doing it otherwise. And I also believe that art is a learned skill.
Yeah.
So I started 7 years ago, and I had no artistic skill. I didn't understand color theory, never used paints really, except for, back in school, high school or elementary school. And the level of skill I had was drawing essentially stick figures. I've got some of my first doodles and sketches and some of my first faces. So I believe it is a learned thing. But I also believe we won't learn it if we aren't enjoying ourselves. And so I've really made an effort to find teachers that focus on that process of enjoying it, so that, because I have my own strong inner art critic. So if I'm in an environment that isn't kind of kind and welcoming around that process, then my inner art critic is just going to be extremely loud. So
yeah. I love what you say too about trying to find teachers who like it feels right? Because I think, I think that like when the relationship, as an educator, and I think you have an education background too, but like that's what it's about, right? It's about relationship and safety and trust, because as we know, like being creative is one of the most vulnerable things you can do, right? And not naming that vulnerability, first of all, and saying like, I'm showing up with like parts of myself I can't even name, right? Like parts of myself I don't even know where they are, but somehow I sit down and something is there that wasn't there before, right? And like we're like dancing around some pretty like magical things, right? And it's very vulnerable to show up that way. And so finding teachers who can support you to like show up with that messiness, I think that's like a really hot tip, right? Is like, how does it feel when I'm with this person? Maybe we all kind of intuitively know that, but just reminding yourself to ask yourself, like, wait a minute, if I'm going to pay this money for this person, or I'm going to go here, like, how do I actually feel afterwards? Am I doing it because I think they make pretty things and I want to make pretty things too? Or am I doing it because they make me feel safe and like challenge me in ways to push myself, right?
Yeah. Yes, for sure.
I should ask myself that question when I think about who, because I fall into it too. Like, and I know you and I both come from that expressive arts world, but like, I fall into it too, where I see somebody like making something and I'm like, oh, I want to make that. Like that.
I know the comparison is so hard. And I struggle with that too, especially, I get both inspired when I get online and go through Instagram and I see beautiful paintings or really emotive paintings, and it does inspire me to get up and go to my art desk, and then there's other times where I'm like, oh, I can't do that, or I wish I could do that, and so I just start to notice those thoughts. That's like my biggest tip around dealing with that inner art critic, is to pay attention to it, notice the thoughts. I'm not sure we can totally get rid of them, but if we don't notice them, they run us subconsciously.
I'm in the same camp as you. And I talk about this in one of the classes that I do, where like there's people even in psychology outside of the art world that talk about the inner critic, and there's people who are say befriend your inner critic, and then there's camps of people who are like your inner critic's an enemy, like it needs to be squashed and like pushed away, you know, call it the gremlin, call it the evil thing. And I am like in between where I'm like, do not kid yourself. This is never going to go away. I like to call it a trickster actually, because it's going to shift and it's going to move and it's going to like, you might like have settled it for a bit, but then you're going to try something else. You're going to go somewhere else and it's going to bubble its way up. And then it's going to be like having a little conversation with you and tricking you. But but it's there for a reason, right? Like it's there. It's trying to keep us safe. It doesn't want us to be too vulnerable. And so we have to just do that. Like that's the mindfulness part that I think is like, my interest is like, we just notice it. We don't do anything about it. We just see it and we're like, hello, like here's my little trickster critic. Here it is again, right?
Yeah, it's interesting you call it trickster because I have a painting series called Raven Voice, which is about that trickster voice in our head.
It is in your art, in your like, wow, crazy. So tell me, so did you like what's it depicting?
So women, essentially with ravens. So I've got one that's got like the ravens kind of like the face is up here and then the wings kind of go down the side of her. So I've got a few ravens show up a lot in my work. And so sometimes I've got one where it's almost like her top, the raven is kind of almost protecting her. I create story a lot with my paintings. So I wait till the painting's kind of done and I'll look at her eyes and I'll be like, what's the story? And then I'll sit down and write her story. So I did a series last year called Raven Voice. And just essentially that inner critic, because it's not just the art critic, but we have an inner critic there. So a reminder to
everywhere all the time. And so, and I mean, I recognize there's people who are like from other parts of the world and don't understand, and my limited knowledge too, but like, is the raven, in my understanding, is often known as a trickster in many of the West Coast cultures, indigenous cultures. And so, and my understanding of most tricksters actually even just around the world in indigenous cultures is they're not necessarily bad or good. They're there to serve a purpose. So is trickster present in your indigenous, like, is that like a...
it's not as much in my own nation, but some of the neighboring nations for sure, that trickster. Lots of stories about the trickster.
That's cool. I'm gonna have to check out I love that you like all the different ways it shows up and like in the head and stuff too, right? Or the way it embodies you too. Okay, so Melanie, I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about expressive arts and how expressive arts can be help you with the joyful practice. So you were just sharing that you paint your faces and then you look at the faces afterwards and will write the story. So I write all the time when I create. Sometimes I will sit down and start writing and then I will create what comes, like imagery that comes out of that. Other times I will have an image first and I will go that way, or I'll have like an object. So anyways, I work in lots of different mediums, but do you want to just talk about like how the expressive arts impacts like the joyful practice piece, or what that looks like for you or other people you work with?
Well, having just done the 10-month expressive arts therapy training and being engaged in creativity every single day. So I had 2 practicum placements, one with children and one with adults. And then in our own training, we had intensive weekends. So we were going through all the training parts ourselves as an experiential learning. So the biggest thing out of all that, because I've had that voice in my head saying I'm not creative. And I think maybe a lot of people have that voice. A lot of us get shut down around art, creativity, music, writing at a young age. So having been engaged in it all year has really helped me realize that I am creative and that you don't need skill to engage in creativity. So that has, again, reinforced that kind of joyful part of engaging in whether it's writing or movement or sound or visual arts, that we don't have to have a particular skill. It doesn't have to be profound. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It's just about engaging in it.
and trusting the process and like, yeah, right. I think that's where us, the people that have the training or sit in the world of expressive arts, like we're like, we're like, expand what is creativity. Like, let's talk as big and as broad as we can. And so for me, and what I try to do with other people too, is sometimes if I find I'm being like too fixed, like I will just tell you what happened to me yesterday. I will just tell you this. I went on Instagram and I saw something and I was like, I'm going to play with that. I think what that person did is really cool. And I had time and I sat down and I started doing it. And I was like, this is terrible. I don't actually know what I'm doing. I'm just making a mess. Right. So my inner critic started happening. And then because I'm like training myself and I help other people do this too, but I like stopped myself and I was like, whoa, this is not like the joyful practice like you talk about, right? Like this is turning into like self-flagellation. So I stopped and I started writing. I just shifted and I started writing. Because what I find is that like if you move to another medium, sometimes you can like outrun the trickster, right? And you can move to a different medium. And so I just kind of started writing. And then I went back and I looked and I was like, why am I don't even know. Like this was like my ego that wanted me to paint something pretty, right? Like so maybe I could take a picture and put it on Instagram or something, right? And I was like, what? And then I stopped and I was like, what is it I actually want to do right now? And I have this like really messy desk that's out of camera that you can't see right now, but I have all these sticks and rocks and stuff. And I was like, you know what, Rachel, you want to make an installation. And so I just kind of started to like make an installation. I moved things around and which is something I use with clients all the time because it's like, it's not hard. You can just take objects. And then I just started playing with them. And then I started to like, oh, okay, this is what you want to actually explore. You want to explore this thought or this idea that you're having. And I freed myself to like move away from the idea or like the rigidity, I guess, of being like, I'm going to make this pretty thing. And I opened it up and like went like that. Right. And then I was happy in the end, right? But I think if I wouldn't have like shifted gears, I think I would have like spent all that time painting something that was ugly and been in the like that wasn't a very joyful practice today. That was more practice and not so joyful, right?
Yeah, and I've certainly experienced that in moving from like one thing like visual arts to writing to movement, how it can shift. And you can kind of explore the same thing, but you're doing it through a different way. And I really discovered the love for writing and poetry this last year, and not something I had been doing. I think in high school I enjoyed it and somehow got shut down on it. And so now it's definitely another creative practice that I have, and bringing that into the classes that I teach as well. So that there's story as a part of whatever the painting is.
Which like takes it into so many different directions, right? Because even I think it's part of like who we are as human beings. Like even just looking at those images behind you, like I see that and I'm like, yes, like there's so much story. I don't know where that story started or what this, like that's the magic of it, right? But like each one of those faces, like it's like a little snapshot in time and there's something going on, and you could just see how that would be like such a gateway to going other directions and opening, right? Whether it's even just for like the exploration of an idea, but also I think there's the sense making that happens through that, right? Like it's going to change the way you feel around your pieces too, right? Or what they represent or whatever, right?
Yeah. And I sometimes I'll just write directly on the canvas with pencil or even pen or and just words, whatever's there, unless I'm coming with a theme to a project or a lesson that I'm teaching. There might be a theme like around journey or so that there's something kind of attached to what's going to be created. But then there's like all this room for it to go where it needs to go.
Yeah. I did your Tree Woman, your online free course, The Tree Woman, which is like so fun. It's beautiful. And like, you start with writing and then there's papers, like you do stuff. And then this little face emerges like this woman in the tree. Right. And I was like, it was interesting for me when I did it too. Cause I just did it in my sketchbook as like, just to play around with, which was great. Cause I spent a few days on it, but I thought like, oh yeah, like you could see where this, like, it just inspires you to like want it to, like the face in the tree and like embodying the tree, like even just that notion, like you offered me this gift of a place to start. And afterwards I felt really inspired about like like just the connection and the embodiment of trees and those sorts of things too, right?
And
so that it was.
What can we learn from and what can we learn from the trees, and how they live together in community? They actually help each other out and communicate with each other. So there's story there, and then how we can learn from that tree and incorporating that into our own lives or paintings or stories.
Right. Which is like, again, to go back to like the joyful practice piece, like what, like that's, isn't that more than just something aesthetically beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Like to think, like what greater thing could we do with our time than think about like our connection to the trees, right? And like where we are and the stories and the myth making that we have. Cause I feel like, I mean, you and I know, and this is probably a whole other thing, but like, I just think in our world, we're lacking that spirit and that connection and that sense making that maybe, like for me, for sure, I don't have a cultural tradition to draw on. I have nothing. Like I'm like this like existential crisis online talking my way through, you know, like I don't have any roots. I don't have any. And so I have a real desire to do like the sense making, the myth making, the storytelling, but I have to make my own stories, right? I don't know what to tell my children. I don't know what my sense of being in place is. And so my creative practice is helping me make sense of like my life as I'm living it. It's helping me create those stories and do that sense making. And so for me, that's the joyful practice that I'm looking for, right? More than, I mean, I kind of want to make pretty things, but I mostly want to do the other side.
I still struggle with wanting to create pretty things.
I know.
But I think it's like the inner beauty that I'm really trying to express.
Yeah. The resonance, like the voice, like when you like touch that like touch point, and it's like, that's what aesthetics is, right? It's not supposed to be about emulation or copying, or, I mean, we can learn, you're right. It's a skill set that we're learning, but when something, you know, when you're scrolling through Instagram and then all of a sudden something has like an aliveness to it, like it's like touching that resonance of that. And I think that's the thing we're all chasing, right? But we get confused and sidetracked. And I think the way you do that is like by inviting yourself to show up in it, right?
Yeah. And I think getting into imagination is part of that joyfulness too. As children are very playful and in their imaginations. And so as adults, to be able to tap into our imagination, there's just such what I call arts medicines. So that medicine of being in our imagination can give us that joy, can give us that connection with ourselves, can allow us to shift out of whatever stress in our life and find a bit of time where we're just kind of feeling peaceful or relaxed.
Yeah. And that's like, I like the way you talk about arts medicines too, right? Like it really elevates it to like, and medicines, right? Like that there's like multiple things at play here. Yeah. Well, Melanie, I think we're like already at 20 minutes. So we should probably honor our time, but I think that probably people are going to want to learn more about you. They should certainly do I'm sure you'll have your Tree Woman still free on your page, and explore. I know you, just as you were talking about medicines, I know you do this beautiful like spirit medicine card piece, right? Is that what it is?
Yeah, medicine cards. Actually, I got some on my desk to
show us.
Keep me grounded. These are ones I just made. Even this, just no words, just this one's to remind me about feeling light, like floating in water. Play, trust. So I've got a couple of free lessons on my site that people don't need to sign up for my newsletter. They can try those out. And then if people are interested in signing up for my newsletter, I've got a Tree Woman lesson.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. And that beautiful, everything that you do is all about that joyful practice and that self-compassion, right? So you are an educator and a teacher who I think holds like the skill piece, obviously, like your portraits are beautiful and you're teaching the skill piece, but you're also teaching like it in the way that honors and challenges you to do the storytelling and the myth making and all of that kind of thing too, right? So that's why I wanted to talk to you, because I felt like you married both of them, right? Which is perfect, right? So
the skill is kind of secondary to the enjoying it.
Yeah, but it all can be in the same wonderful package, right?
Like, but it can be joyful to learn a new skill. and
Absolutely.
be able
Yeah,
to express
absolutely.
more. When I started, I felt like I didn't have a vocabulary. And so I wanted to learn how to do things so that I could
Mhm.
express myself more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing your process and what you do for students. And yeah,
Well,
and
thanks for
you
having
can
me.
check her out. Obviously, we'll have all of her links to everything too. And so thanks. I felt enriched by that conversation. So I'm sure that many other people have found little nuggets and things along the way. So yeah, we'll see you down the line and we'll continue to connect and hopefully people can find you. And thanks for taking the time with us this morning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Okay. Take care. Bye.
Okay. Bye.